folk that's pulling you down because they acting like crabs in the barrel. Somebody ought to help me say it. Ain't nobody got time for that. There are a few more things I want to give you. That in your season of struggle, you cannot have time for if you want to survive this season. One of the things you've got to make sure you don't do and you can't have time for is when you're in the season of struggle, stop trying to do God's part. What are you saying, preacher? Sometimes we start trying to do what God says, if you get out of the way and let me do it, it'll get done. We try to take God's place sometimes, and it causes the season to be prolonged. Another thing that we've got to make sure that we don't do if we want to survive this season is realize that God sends men and women into our lives to keep us focused. But just like God sends people to our lives, the enemy also sends people to our lives. God will send people to keep you focused, but the enemy will send people to keep you distracted. How do you know the difference? You'll be able to tell by how they talk and how they act. That'll tell you the difference between who sent them. As a matter of fact, if you can't tell that way, just ask them and look them straight in the eye and say, who sent you? Are you God sent, or are you coming from some other source? The beauty of it is when you determine this and you identify who sent them, it'll give and shed some light on your struggle. Here are a few other things. You can't have for time for anybody who feeds your weakness. There are many times we're making too much space and opportunity in our lives for people who help keep us weak. What are you talking about, preacher? If the only time they want to show up and connect with you is when it's going to take you out of the presence of the Lord, you don't need to be connected to that. There's some of you that know that when certain people show up in your life, it drains you of all your strength. It cuts your hair just like Samson. And the strength that you had, you no longer had. Matter of fact, it takes your mind to another place. Where you was strong, all of a sudden you weak. Stuff that you used to be able to stand up to. Let me give you a good example. Things that you wouldn't even have a taste to do, you don't have a taste to do it until they show up. Am I talking to some real folk in here? Are you looking at your life? Hopefully it's revealing to you that some seasons cause you to struggle because we're connected to the wrong people. Some of us are in situations right now where the enemy is causing us to fear instead of have faith. The enemy replaces our faith with fear. And anytime you're fearing, that means you no longer believe in God. But the moment you begin to have faith, the Bible declares that faith is the substance of things hoped for, where the Bible scholars at, and the evidence of things that are not seen. So it's important that we get to a place that we stop allowing these time wasters and these time killers to rob us for time, keeping us in a season and locked into a place that the enemy allows us not to be able to recognize the promises of God. So, know who and what you have time for, and you will survive this season of struggle. Somebody lift a hand in here and say, I will survive. Say it like you believe it. Say, I will survive. Make sure there's time available for God. Many of us, we have shifted when we look at the time that we have available for God. When we first got saved, when we first believed, we had more time for God than we do now. God is no longer a priority on our schedule.